Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Lucy McBride. This is my weekly live, unedited, unscripted podcast or Substack Live, where we get to the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of how to be healthy mentally and physically. And today we're going to talk about cognitively. I'm joined today by a cognitive neuroscientist. Her name is Julie Fratantoni, who's a storyteller, writer, distributor of fact-based information on her Substack called Better Brain. And we're going to talk today about 5 tips, and probably more, to protect your brain, to improve your cognitive health. We all know about dementia. We know about the toll it takes on families, on the toll it takes on caregivers. I see patients in my clinic all the time with dementia or who are caring for loved ones with dementia. And I wrote today in my Substack about the fear people have when dementia or cognitive impairment is in their family. It's understandable. What's hopeful is that genetic predisposition, family history is not destiny. Of course, genetics play a role in our cognitive health, but what's really nice to know and to tell patients is that there are modifiable risk factors that can improve your cognitive health. As recently as 2024, the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care has identified 14 modifiable risk factors that can help significantly impact your risk for dementia. And they're not, it's easier said than done on some of these things, but today we're going to talk about some of those things. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Julie, to take it away on what you think of as the highest yield interventions for one's brain on an everyday basis.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here with all of you. I'll give you some quick background on me. I am trained as
Please.
a cognitive neuroscientist, specializing really in executive functions and the ways that you use your brain every single day. So, metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And I think this is the one that tends to stump people the most because it's the most difficult to give, say, a blanket recommendation in the way that you can give for exercise of, approximately so many minutes of aerobic activity per week versus strength training. There's kind of general guidelines. But when it comes to the way that you're using your brain, the types of things you're interested in, what you do for your job, your responsibilities, your hobbies, your passions, that varies so much from person to person. And so it's really not prescriptive. It takes a little bit of work, investigative work, on yourself, right, to really figure out what that is for you. But I want to give some strategies today in terms of just how you can be thinking about your thinking and ways to do that to be promoting brain health. Because what a lot of people don't realize is the way that you're using your brain. A lot of our habits or a lot of things that are considered normal in our society and culture are counterproductive when it comes to wanting to build a healthier brain. So yeah, happy to dive right into that if you're
So
ready.
give me before we get into the strategies, give me some examples. I mean, I can think of a lot of off the top of my head of ways in which our culture, society, lifestyle in the modern era is a drain, is brain draining.
Yeah. So one big one is multitasking. And we see this all the time. I mean, how many of you that are tuned in right now also have a TV on in the background, or you've got your email up, or you're getting other push notifications, banners dropping down at the top? That's this idea that we can be more productive by doing more things simultaneously. We know from research shows is false, and it in fact increases stress on the brain. So that's one really common example of something that people would put on their resume. People would pride themselves on, I'm being a good multitasker. People actually, when I say this, a lot of people tell me, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved because I've never been good at multitasking. And I'm like, that's right. It's because your brain, you're forcing yourself to rapidly switch back and forth between two tasks. And yeah, that just contributes to stress. So, the antidote to that would be to do one thing at a time, which can tend to be very difficult when in our digital age, we constantly have a lot of distractions and pings and things that we're, bouncing back and forth between tasks or tabs or whatever it may be for you. And so retraining that is going to take some effort.
So is that one of the tips you would have for people, like just get out of the gate is like slowing it down and doing one task at a time?
Absolutely. That actually wasn't one of the ones I was planning to talk about, but it's a it's a really good
Bonus.
one. Yeah, bonus tip. So, yeah, I think,
It's hard to do when you're in your regular life, right? Like, I'm as a physician, I'm sitting or even as a person, right? It's like I'm on my computer, my phone is, pinging me. You've got tabs open in your mind about all the different things you need to be doing. So how do you help people with attention and focus in an inattentive landscape?
Yeah, I actually created an entire course for this. And I also work with people one on one because this is one of the biggest complaints that I hear about. And it is one of the most, honestly, things that gets in the way for you to be able to do the things you need to do, not just your job, but also things you care about or wanting to be present with your family. And it really comes down to time, right? How do you
Yeah.
want to allocate your time and attention? Your time is so valuable. So, it's not something that will happen overnight. I tell people like it's all about these small little changes. And it is overwhelming to think like, oh my gosh, I need to change everything I've done. And we know that repetition rewires. So think about how many times a day you are training yourself to check your phone as soon as there's a little ping sound, or, before you know it, you're checking your phone even when there wasn't a ping sound, right? There's the kind of just these habits that we've built. And so to begin to rewire those, it's doing small things at a time, right? So it's working. Say I'm going to focus without distractions. I'm going to put everything on do not disturb and shut my door or put headphones on, or set up your environment. Environments really plays a really big role in this. But it's like what I'm going to do this for 10 minutes, right? Or even for some people, it's like 5 minutes, right? And you just start really small, and then you do that for a week every day, and then you go up to 10 minutes, right? And you just incrementally increase what I call your focus muscle, right? It's not a muscle, but just that stamina, that ability to resist the temptation. And that helps to rewire and then reinforce more like kind of a more positive. Sorry, let me say this a different way. To help just get a better reward rather than kind of these smaller little hits, to actually have the gratification of I completed this task and then can move forward. So it
I
just,
think these are great points. I think it also it starts with self-awareness. I think many of us aren't aware of the number of tabs we have open in our minds or the amount of time we're checking our phone or drawn to some, you know, thought that's a stray thought. I think self-awareness first. I mean, I am guilty of not remembering where I parked my car at the end of the day in my parking lot, not because I have cognitive impairment, like in a medical sense, but because I was often on the phone when I parked, or I was thinking about something else when I parked. So I didn't make the memory in the first place. That's inattention
that's right.
affecting cognition.
You will.
So what I like to do and what I try to do is when I'm driving into work is like feel the air conditioning on my, brow and be in the moment and notice the lady walking across the street in her, loveliness, being present. But it's an uphill battle and it's work for people to first notice their inattention and then to do something about it.
So many people come to me concerned about their memory when really it's just that they were distracted and they weren't paying attention. And in order to form a memory, you have to pay attention. And not only need to be paying attention, but then your brain needs time to encode it and needs rest. And so it's like when you're booked back to back to back and going from one thing to the next, not only were you only half sort of paying attention to begin with, but then you're right on to the next thing. So they're really your brain needs that period of rest in between so that I can actually form those new connections, which is another thing that I would say societally, rest is not something that comes naturally, at least in American culture. A lot of cities, it's very normal. And in fact, even people pride themselves on how, it was like a status symbol for a while of how busy people were. Which is really interesting. But circling back to your point about starting with awareness, a really easy activity that people can do when you're sitting down and if you're wanting to improve your focus, if this is something that you want to improve, the next time you need to sit down and work on something, just have a little sheet of paper, notepad next to you, and just tally every single time you get interrupted or distracted or get up to get something or switch tabs or, whatever that is. And just notice how many within a 20-minute window or 30-minute window or 45 minutes, however long you set aside for that task. And just as you start to notice it, and then it's like building that awareness, then it tends to lessen because you are more aware of it. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to fight the urge, or I'll just jot it down and I can tend to that later. It's helpful to just get it out of your head.
That's a
But I
great
actually,
strategy. It's like
yeah,
kind of like a taking inventory of how you're spending your precious real estate, your brain space. Like, how are you spending it? I think we don't always have awareness of how much noise is in there and distractibility. And I love the idea, Julie, of writing it down.
yeah.
Um,
I call
yeah,
this like your cognitive capital, right? Like we're
yeah,
aware of budgets and time, how we allocate money. It's like how are you allocating your most valuable resource, most limited resource? This you only have so much attentional capacity, you only have so much mental energy for the day, right? And it's like, do you really want to spend it on whatever is just grabs your attention first, or do you want to be in control of directing your attention yourself?
yeah.
And actually, I am leading a workshop on this next week. So if people want to do a deeper
Great.
dive on this specifically in terms of focus and distractions and breaking up with your phone, check that out. I can,
That's awesome. Could they find that on your Substack, Better
you know what?
Brain? Where
You heard it here first. I'm actually about to send out something about it tomorrow. So this is
Okay, great. So people can sign up for your Substack right here and then get that. Okay, so Julie, let's talk about the initial goal of the 5 tips. I think there are going to be more than 5. I can already tell, but for optimizing your brain health,
yeah.
shoot.
Okay. So this first one is, I'm sure you've seen, and it's been, I think, like the paper of the year where everyone's been talking about ChatGPT and causing cognitive debt and what happens with that. And so I want to use that as a springboard for this first strategy.
Great,
So with that, what one of the main findings from this paper, big findings, I would say, is this idea that people who for the participants in the group that first, for anyone who isn't familiar with the study, they had different groups of people write an essay, either using just a Google search engine, using AI. So they called it the LLM group, large language model group. And then the third group was just with their brain, nothing assisted. And so what they found was with the group that they first used a chat GPT or a large language model, they wrote the essay with using it. And then they said, okay, now write an essay without using anything, use just your brain. And they found that they had what they called cognitive debt. Basically, when they outsourced the effortful process that was required for thinking, it sort of bypassed memory encoding. It made them less creative. And so basically, when you are outsourcing, right, that effortful process of thinking, then you're missing out on these really important cognitive skills, not only forming memories, like we were talking about the importance of that, but the efforts required for that. And so my first strategy is really about being an active engaging versus passive. So there's a way to use ChatGPT in an active way where it can be a good tool that can even enhance your cognition, enhance your performance. But there's a way to use it where it's passive. And even to illustrate even more so how passive it was, in that group, 15 out of the 18 people in that group couldn't quote a sentence from the essay they had just written, compared to only 2 out of the 18 from who used their brain to write the essay couldn't remember. So just the stark contrast, right, of what's happening, and you're not giving your brain a chance to do that. So what this looks like in real life, and again, I want to say you don't have to do this with every single piece of information. That would be exhausting. You don't need to do that. But for the things that matter to you, for the things that you care about, for things that are really important, that you want to pay attention to, that you want to remember, that are, valuable, you need to do the work, right? So you have to be present. You need to be not distracted. You have to give it your full attention, and do it with your brain first. So whether it's, this is, I mean, the study was specific to writing an essay, so I can't say that it's for all activities, but try it brain first without anything. Actively engage as you're doing that. And then if you want to bring in a tool like that, make sure that you're then connecting it to existing information. You're asking, what can I do to update my thinking? What are angles I'm not thinking about, right? That's an active role. And I like to use the analogy also of riding a bike. Like, you can't be a passive passenger on a bike. You have to steer, you have to pedal. If not, you're not going to go anywhere. And so I want you to use AI or ChatGPT like a bicycle when you're going to incorporate it. And then the last thing is that piece, that time to reflect. So after you're done doing whatever you're doing, close everything down and then repeat back what you learned. Say it out loud or write it down. And so this whole process, when I say engaging actively, this is what it requires, is all of these pieces, and not necessarily, again, all the time, but for those things that really matter, you have to actively engage.
I love that, Julie. It speaks to the sort of medical advice I give to my patients who are trying to optimize their cognition or just prevent decline at any age. It's really about the mindfulness and attention to the task at hand. It's about flexing your cognitive muscle, right? Like being an active participant in your thinking, right? So
Mhm.
we all know the experience when you're reading a book. I've done this recently where you're reading a book and you're reading the words, but your mind is over here. And
Yes.
so it's like the conscious attention to the page and the words and like not reading it. I mean, sometimes reading it out loud actually, I think is has been shown to help people, retain information. I'm not going to read it out loud to myself, but I guess I could. I guess the point is not taking your brain for granted when you're doing tasks like writing an essay or reading a book and engaging it like you would any muscle in your body. And
Mhm.
I think that's a really good point.
And it's like, if you're going to take the time to read a book, to listen to a podcast, to attend a lecture, to read a news article, right? Any piece of information that you're going to voluntarily engage with, if you're going to spend the time to do it, then get something out of it. Don't just sort of let it go in one ear and out the other. Unless it's just for pure entertainment, then that could be a different thing. But even attending a play or watching a TV show or a movie, you can still actively engage. And the difference between that would be, again, yeah, just kind of like letting it wash over you, right? And there's a time and a place where that's appropriate. But for the majority, for again, at least once a day, right? We need to be engaging actively. And a way you can do this with other forms of media is to come up with, what is your one sentence takeaway? What is, one
Yeah.
lesson or take home message? Or if you're going to share it, this this drives me crazy when they'll send me an article or something, but it's like, accompany that with one or two sentences of why that person, like why it should matter to that person specifically. What are the bigger themes? Like why, like I sent my friend something and I was like, oh, this stands out because this, she was really interested in something around like fear and identity. And so like, I was like, oh, you're going to love this because this touches on these big themes that like you've been, talking about lately. And so it's like, give them something, and the process of you doing that not only is it going to be helpful for your friend, they'll appreciate, your recommendation better, be more likely to probably read or watch it. But for yourself, you're having to synthesize and kind of zoom out and connect to other pieces of knowledge. That's just a really good exercise. And
I love
I
it.
want to,
Yeah, thinking about thinking as a muscle. It sounds
yeah,
like and flexing it and being an active participant in your thinking. Because our
yeah,
brains are on like, you know, they're working all the time, right? They're ambiently sort of absorbing things and processing things. But I think the engagement, I mean, it's probably why, learning a new language or dusting off your high school French and when you're in your 70s or 80s like my dad is doing is good for cognition because it forces you to learn, to think, right? You can't be a passive
right.
recipient of a new language, right? You have to actively practice it.
Yeah. Okay. So that can segue us into our next
Great.
one. Well, we
Great.
could go two different ways. One, I wanted to say, when you were talking about reading and feeling like you're reading the words on the page, but like your mind is elsewhere, or, things are going. One of my big 5 is emotion regulation, managing stress, because when your body is in your sympathetic nervous system is aroused, you're in that fight or flight state, your limbic system is what's active and driving, and your prefrontal cortex is then not. And so your prefrontal cortex is what you need to be able to think deeply, to reason, all of your executive functions of judgment, planning, problem solving, organization, right? Being able to think more, um, actively, right, engaging in this type of, active engagement. So, I do, if we wanna go into that, we can talk about some different emotion regulation strategies,
Well, let's
but
talk about that for a second because I think one of the known sort of evidence-based ways to help prevent, cognitive decline and certainly in the short term and also I think in the long term is stress management, emotion regulation. I think emotion regulation is a skill that is not taught to people early, like we learn, reading and writing, we should learn emotional regulation. I think it's particularly important in this era we're living in, where there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of misinformation coming at us, there's a lot of a competition for our attention and outrage. And so I would love you to someone's asking us to speak slower. So stress of losing democracy, politics, well, we could touch on that too. I think that so I think that, yes, there's never been a greater need than there is right now to think about emotion regulation. And this does not mean, as I say to my patients, it doesn't mean not experiencing anxiety or not experiencing despair. That's part of the human condition. Rather, it's how emotion regulation is about you calibrating or trying to calibrate your feelings to match the moment and not letting your emotions take control. In other words, you try to be in control of your emotions instead of the other way around. It's harder to do than it is to say, but
Yeah, when I talk about this, I actually like using the phrase recovery from stress instead of saying stress management. It's not like, oh, this thing I need to manage. It's like we're all going to get stressed as part of life. And there's actually a healthy form of stress that is part of a different strategy we'll touch on. But yeah, it's how you recover from it. And that's like everything in life, right? It's like how you respond to it. So stress will come, we will get dysregulated, we will experience uncomfortable, hard emotions. But then what do you do with them? And you're right, it's not something that we were really taught in school. I think now they're starting to do a lot more of that with breath work and mindfulness and these types of things. But I have two different ways that I like to teach emotion regulation. One is really quick. It is the physiological sigh. So this is something that we can all do together. So if you are sitting, maybe get both
I'm going to
feet
do it.
grounded on the floor and sit up straight so your spine can be long and your lungs have room. And so basically it's just one full inhale and then pause at the top, take in an extra little sip of air, and then sigh out the mouth. So here, let's try it to go. So let's breathe in, take an extra little sip in, sigh out.
I mean, it literally brings that parasympathetic nervous system online. I don't know. I mean, I feel that sort of wash of calm, it may last 2 seconds, it may last 2 hours, but I think the message that you're telling people and what I talk to my patients about is that you do have an internal system that is built to help you bring your prefrontal cortex back online, the logic, the rational side of you, and to calm down the amygdala and limbic system. We have it built in. You don't have to pay for a fancy membership. You can just breathe. That's really the upshot.
Yeah, and I'm loving seeing the comments here. It's
Yes.
just even one breath like that, you feel immediate relief. And you can do a few of those, and it's great because you can do it anytime, anywhere. And it's a nice entry point into the system because oftentimes stress is psychological. We're not actually in danger of, life-threatening danger. Sometimes we are, and in that case, then you want that stress response, right? For survival. But most of the time, it's like a deadline or traffic or, a relational situation. And so, it's hard to outthink that, right? And so cognitive strategies, we can talk about one, but yeah, I really appreciate breath work for that reason. And you are actually modulating your brain chemistry in real time. So I love talking about this because I think people sometimes think that breath work is a little woo woo. And, the science behind that is that when you, are breathing a shallow chest breath that's like these, kind of like panicky breath, it changes up the ratio of carbon dioxide and oxygen in your blood. And it turns out that the part of your brain that produces a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine, it's in the locus ceruleus, it modulates how much norepinephrine gets produced based on the amounts of carbon dioxide in your blood. So when you change that up by taking a slower, deep breath, it can then help modulate those norepinephrine levels to be a more optimal level. And the thing with norepinephrine and everything in the body, I mean, it's complex. It does a lot of different things. And if you have not enough of it, it's sort of like drowsy, hard to focus, kind of when you first wake up. If you have too much of it, it's that really anxious, like I can't focus in that sense. And then that sweet spot right in the middle is that just calm focus. And so you could feel that kind of when you took that breath. So yeah, I just think that's really powerful way to change your brain chemistry in real time so that you can then get your prefrontal cortex back online. You can think clearly and kind of reason your way and problem solve.
I love it. I sometimes do the 4-7-8 breathing at bedtime. It really can make me drowsy. Um, it's the inhale for 4, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. If I do that 4 times and I've, like, I'm, like, have a cozy bed situation and I haven't, like, just been on my phone, um, it'll make me really drowsy. It's a really, really great tool.
I
Anyway,
love
so
the 4,
breath
7,
work
8.
for the
So
win. Breath work for the win.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
keep going, Julie.
Okay, yeah. The other one I'll share for emotion regulation, just because, and I wrote a 3-part series on this on my Substack, because I believe emotion regulation is so crucial, not only for just your quality of life day to day now, but also because of the benefits for longer term cognitive longevity and brain health. I just think it's something that's just so, it's like it's overdone in terms of like the stress management industry is huge, but then it's like everyone's still stressed. And so anyway, I just think it's something we can pay attention to. Um, this other one is reappraisal. So reframing, I just think can be so helpful. So this is like, this idea that if you've got something you're really anxious about, reframing that anxiety as helpful or excitement. And not to say that, not to, gaslight yourself by any means, but in situations where it's like, like I need to, I'm giving a talk, I'm giving a presentation, or I have to go present to a board meeting, or you're having to, I don't know, do something, right? Something that's giving you that stress, and recognizing that physiologically my body's preparing to help me. So like my heart rate's increasing, my palms might be sweaty or whatever, but that's actually going to help me perform my best. So I can thank my body for being in that state, because the body does need a little bit of stress to perform well. Um, and so, anyway, so kind of reappraising situations. Or another example would be, you text a friend and then you just don't hear back from them. And you're like, gosh, like, do they hate me? Are we in a fight? Did I do something wrong? What happened? And instead to think, okay, well, maybe they just had a really long day, or maybe they're going through something, or maybe they just like literally missed it. And it's like, and I should just reach out and check on them. And that reframing. So it's reframing how you think to then kind of change how you feel. And it doesn't mean that the feelings go away, or you're not trying to make them go away, but it's just a way to move through it. And there are studies that have found that people that engage in this strategy, they saw that it was longer lasting than just in that moment. So it actually showed less activity in the amygdala, right, that emotion threat detection center, and more activity in the prefrontal cortex. So that's really cool. And then they also saw changes in heart rate variability, so increases in that, which is really kind of just a good measure of your ability to rebound and adapt to stress, as well as longer telomeres. So that's kind of an indication of longevity, cellular health. So, these things are not just managing stress and emotions in the moment. Emotions, really being able to do that has these, greater health, physiological, and longevity implications.
That's great. That's great advice. I love it. So, okay, so what is next? We talked about emotional regulation. We talked
Yeah,
about thinking, the flexing of your cognitive muscles,
being
not being a
active.
pass and the active participation in learning and processing,
Yeah.
not just letting, you know, the junk of life just like wash over you in a passive way.
Okay, so you mentioned, I think you said your dad is brushing off his old
My
French
dad is
textbooks. And
taking French
okay.
again for his cognitive health and also because he likes, speaking French.
Okay. So I want to talk about that, because that is something I hear all the time. People are like, oh, I'm learning the language. And I'm like, great. But this is not like, it's kind of like the crossword puzzles myth. It's like, that isn't just, that in and of itself is not going to be enough to be a safeguard. But let's talk about the same way that we talked about using ChatGPT, passive versus active. Like there's ways with learning or things you're doing in your life that could be beneficial or could not. Just depends on how you're doing it. So I just want people to appreciate the nuance there. And I apologize. When I get excited, I do talk really fast. So I'm going to try to slow it down. I realized I was just getting on a roll there. So yeah. So what I want to talk about is hormesis, or just challenge, the right level
Mm.
of challenge. Hormesis is a fun word that just it speaks to a good stress. There's also the word eustress, that means good stress.
Like EU
Um,
stress.
yeah, eustress. And so hormesis, I think, is a toxicology term, where basically a small amount of something is beneficial to an organism, but a very large amount becomes toxic. And that could be with anything. I mean, with water, right? You can actually die of drinking too much water, but the right amount of it you really need to thrive. Same thing with, say, exercise, right? The right amount can help you, break down muscles and build stronger ones. Too much exercise can lead to injury and being, run down. So hormesis for your brain, for your cognition, that's something that is going to be individual for every single person, right? Again, I can't tell you what level of challenge is going to be appropriate. So, you know, and then also not taking on challenge just for the sake of challenge, but doing things that you actually care about and are interested in. So in this case with, learning French, that's amazing. If you have a passion for the language, you want to visit the country or you want to, enjoy going to more French restaurants or like whatever it is that it has some real life practical it's meaningful. There was a study, this was the Human Connectome Project database. It was over 12,000 people, and they found that this low to moderate stress can actually induce cognitive benefits that promote resilience. So just again, speaking to kind of touching on the idea we said a minute ago about it's not trying to eliminate stress from your life. It's actually just this is now about kind of getting the right level of stress for you, because of course if you're overwhelmed then that becomes unhealthy, but you do need a certain amount of stress, because there's also the other end of the extreme would be having no challenge and life is too easy, and and then we see people get depressed, we see people become really unhappy, and we see declines, and so I've seen this with a lot of people that I know, right? They just like retire and stop engaging, and there's no challenge, and there's it's just because you don't actually get to stay stagnant, unfortunately. So it would be nice if you could just like kind of coast, but unfortunately you're either fortunately or unfortunately every day you're moving forwards or backwards. So I want you to think about you're never at a point where you're like, I've got it, I'm healthy now, right? Like anything, you're physical. It's like you have to keep, eating healthy and moving your body and sleeping and doing these things regularly. So it isn't a one and done. But all that to say, so good forms of stress for your brain are, engaging in new learning and finding that right level of challenge. And um, I, I guess to give people some more concrete tangibles of what that could look like. So I love recommending whatever your I think it's really important for people to have hobbies and passions and things that they do outside of work, right? And then that overlaps. You get kind of usually a social benefit with that because it's usually something with other people. There are plenty that you can do by yourself, and that's great too. So maybe it's 50-50. I don't know. But diving into that hobby and this thing that you care about and just like leveling up, like what is the next level of that, right? So it's like, okay, French 101 and then next semester is 102, right? Or whatever that looks like. And this doesn't need to be also, I want to say, this doesn't have to be from a textbook. It doesn't need to be in a classroom. There are so many different types of learning that you can do. Learning socially, learning, just meeting someone new and asking them questions about their life is a form of learning. Having conversations, right? Caring about your neighbor's new dog or their day or whatever they're doing with their landscaping, right? Like being curious is a big part of that. You can do physical learning. So that could be taking a dance class, yoga, whatever form of movement you want to learn, karate, martial arts. And so, yeah. And then of course it can be more traditional, like tuning into a podcast, reading a newsletter. But yeah, so just to think broadly about all the different ways that you can take in information and to make sure that you are, again, not just passively engaging with it and consuming just for the sake of consuming, but actually coming up with critical, actionable takeaways, things that change you and are meaningful or help you grow. And so, yeah, I'll pause there, see if we have any.
I love that. No, I think it's great. I mean, I think it all speaks to the various sort of evidence-based ways that in medicine we counsel patients to help, improve their cognition or protect their cognition. It's the combination of social engagement. It's the active learning. It's the right amount of stress. Like you can't rid yourself of stress. That would be really handy, but actually it would be detrimental. And so this all makes so much sense. I think, if you can do an activity where it's like a 3-for-1, it's ideal, right? Where it's something that you find that's your passion or something you really enjoy, that's social and that connects you to like your thinking in a more active way. That's ideal. So I think like something like book clubs, I see a lot of my older patients, and younger patients too, but joining book clubs, even if it's virtual, to like have the accountability with the active reading and, to have the social element, or doing, bridge or mahjong or one of these games where they have to really think. And I mean, those games intimidate me. I'm not that old, but like they're hard, right? So I think these are all great pieces of advice, Julie.
Thanks. All right. So the next one is about flexible thinking. So,
Okay, let's
just
talk
like the
about it.
body, we want it to be strong and flexible. We want, think about brain health like a bridge, right? You want it to have enough structure to be sturdy, but it's also got to be able to move a little or it's going to snap. And so, how do you find that balance? We talked about, I would say, engaging actively, having that right level of challenge. I would say that's like the heavy lifting, right? Building muscle. And now for the flexibility part, that actually looks a lot of different ways, but this is still a frontal lobe executive function. And something I meant to say at the beginning too, with my focus on prefrontal cortex and all these executive function or cognitive strategies, this is the last part of the brain to develop. We're very familiar with, the brain finishes developing mid to late 20s, but it is the first part of the brain that we start to see decline. And you start to see that around age 40. So that's actually a very small window of, 10, 15 years of good peak function. And then we see this downhill trajectory. And like you said at the beginning, just because that's what we see doesn't mean that's what has to be normal. And you certainly don't need to accept that fate. And I would say a big part of, so this is my speculation, I would say, about the decline around that age is that a lot of people tend to go on autopilot and just cruise and aren't really learning new skills or just aren't engaging.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so we talked about the importance of challenge in that. But then with that, changing things up, right? Being flexible and flexible thinking within these executive functions covers a lot of different things. So flexible thinking can look like asking questions and seeing different perspectives, different points of view that ties into empathy. So there's a social component there, resolving conflict, right? Being able to work through something like that. What else? And just I think we see this sometimes as people get older, they just get more set in their ways.
Mhm.
And just like it's like, oh, this is just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. It's the way it's always going to be. And for some things that makes sense. For some things you don't need to innovate maybe the way you brush your teeth, or maybe you do. But for other things in life, it's important have to shake things up and not just have things be status quo. So this kind of all ties into this being able to be flexible. And so
It
I,
sounds
I,
like you're talking
yeah,
about maintaining curiosity and openness, which I think also is good for relationships, certainly, and good for stress management. Um, yeah, I think
yeah,
curiosity is, unfortunately, I think something that societally is like gone down. Curiosity about other people, about other points of view at whatever age. Um, but yeah, I think asking questions more is a great skill and quality, and we're never too old to ask questions of like, why do you think that way? I wonder where that point of view is coming from.
that is.
Ideally, it's not in a rage-filled argument over like the Thanksgiving table with your uncle or something. But I think those conversations are the stuff of life, and that's where our brains can really flex.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, sometimes, I would say one of the most challenging things for the brain to do is to have a conversation when you disagree with someone. And I'm not saying that you have to agree with them, but to be able to have that dialogue. And a big reason for that is because your body thinks it's a threat and the limbic system takes over and your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you're not able to really reason and think clearly, and then you say things you regret, or that the downward spiral. So it's like this requires both the emotion regulation piece and then, can I think flexibly, can I stay open, can I stay curious? And again, it doesn't mean that you need to agree with them or support what they think, but can I, and also to separate a person, this is a person versus this is what they think or believe, and to kind of tease that apart and say like, and then, and beyond just, I guess, relational stress or like conflict examples, it's also, as you're brainstorming, say, a marketing campaign, or I'm just thinking of all different professions, things that you're thinking about. It's like, what perspectives, like who's not at the table right now? and who someone, what someone who doesn't look like me, or like, what would they think about this? Or what would my dad think about this? What would my neighbor think? What would, what would my friend who lives out of the country think about this, right? Like, how would they perceive this information? And it just is such a great exercise. And I think that people don't realize that that's counts as a brain exercise, but it's something that helps you to stay flexible and open and curious. And we see this in the research, as curiosity and that continued learning piece, being so beneficial and helpful and really protective as you age.
I love it, and protect, and the empathy too is protective, I do think. I mean, I don't know what kind of data is done. I don't know how you study empathy in, like, a randomized controlled trial. Um, but I think in terms of, like, the immediate benefits of empathy, it's good for relationships, it's good for learning, um, and it's good for your own ability to be able to change
Yeah.
your mind if you're willing to be changed. I think we all could benefit from, you know, curiosity about others' points of view. I know I could.
Yeah.
And I think you're totally right. It's so true that one of the hardest things for a brain to do is to have an argument with somebody you completely disagree with. It's like the stress test, right? It's like, because you're flooded with emotion, your amygdala is like taking over that frontal cortex. And so you're like in that fight or flight, right? So there's stress. So I think maybe one exercise could be for people, think about a point of view you feel pretty strongly about, and think about what it would be like to talk to somebody on the other side calmly and rationally. And, like, even, like, my kids are in college now, but they had to write a paper in high school where they had to write from the point of view of the opposing argument, right? I mean, that's hard, but
It's
that's good for
very
your
hard,
own
but
brain.
it's very good brain exercise. Yeah. Can you see it from their perspective? Don't have to agree with it, just can you see it? I actually, um, I initially, when I started on at UT Dallas Center for Brain Health, was because of a grant to look at the neuroscience of kindness, empathy, and compassion. And so I've actually gotten to dig into a lot of the literature around empathy and kindness. And there was a study, lots of studies, but there is a study that looked specifically at patients who interacted with a physician, and the ones that had a more empathetic doctor versus not actually healed faster and had less markers of inflammation in their body. And so this is something that not only is good, relationally helpful for us, helpful for brain health, but also your physical health. So, I mean, brain health
Yeah,
is part of physical health, but I just love that
that's
study.
true. I
And
mean, yeah, I mean, empathy and trust are sort of like the glue in any relationship, right? So, I think that I think that there's nothing bad about empathy or curiosity. Um, so I think, yeah, it makes complete sense that it's a important brain uh, ingredient, if you will. So
yeah.
what else is on your list, Julie? This
Okay,
is great.
so we've gone through engaging actively versus passive. We've talked about the right amount of hormesis or stress and challenge
Hormesis,
that needs to be.
HORMESIS.
Uh-huh. Yes. Um, we talked about being flexible in your thinking, practicing empathy, engaging in other perspectives, points of view. We talked about the importance of recovering from stress, regulating your emotions. We did a physiological sigh, talked about reappraisal. And this last one is purpose.
Mm,
So I ask a lot of people, and you'd be maybe surprised, maybe not, at how many people, if you ask, like, what is your true identity or what is your purpose? Um, and people usually, sometimes they don't know, but if you ask them, they usually, if they have a minute to think about it, they really know, like, what they want to exist and do, right? And not all the time is our life and day to day necessarily get to be aligned with that. But I will say, to have the clarity of what that is and that picture for your life is really important. Um, they did a longitudinal analysis of over 11,000 older adults, and they found that having a sense of purpose in life, was protective against cognitive decline. So, this ties into not only what we were saying about the learning piece, right, and having things you're passionate in and interested in, but it's like having a reason to get up in the morning, having people that rely on you, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. All of these things really matter. And I love the example of in Japan. Um, when they retire, they then get a retirement job. So it's like they can become like a desk clerk or a school crossing guard or, volunteer. And it's like you still need to be part of the community. You still have to be connected. And we know that social connection, I mean, is one of the most protective factors for brain health and longevity as you age. But yeah, I just want to touch on this one because I think, again, it's one that people don't hear as much about. And it's, again, not something prescriptive that you can give someone. It requires that introspection, that time to think about it and how do you want to live your life, right? But having that true north inner compass for yourself is actually a very protective thing. And there's an exercise that one of my colleagues does. His name's Bruce Mao, and he calls it the personal manifesto, which makes it sound really fancy. But basically, you can set a timer for 2 minutes and just write down, like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And that sounds really daunting, but you'd be shocked at how quickly you can do it. So that's something fun that y'all can try at home if you want after this. But yeah, having
I
purpose.
love this. I love this, Julie. The centering of self and purpose. And I don't think it has to be fancy or some sort of like, I want to, make this much money, or I want to have this certain title at work. It can be a purpose can be as simple as I want to, dig in my garden and watch my flowers grow. It can be I want to volunteer. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. It can be
Yeah.
contentedness can be a purpose. I mean, I think a lot of people walk around without a sense of contentedness kind of ever and need to kind of drill down into what it is that gives them a sense of just minute to minute purpose and contentedness is a reasonable thing to be alive for. Um, so I think these are great points. I love the practical application of a lot of what the science is showing us. I think in the old days, we used to think that our brains were pretty much cooked, done by the time we were in, our middle age at least. And now we know that our brains are so plastic. There's so much dynamic activity going on in our brains, such that when my patients come in and talk to me about their family history of cognitive decline or their own kind of concerns about, not remembering that acquaintance's name or not remembering where they parked their car in the parking lot like I do a lot of nights. It's nice to remind people that I think that there's so many dynamic elements to the brain, and there's so many practical things you can do to preserve your cognition and to improve your cognition, which improves your whole health.
Yes, I want to encourage people with hope. I think the message of neuroplasticity, what we've learned about the brain in the last several decades of research, is incredibly hopeful. And there are all these modifiable lifestyle risk factors, things that you can be doing to really take control of your brain health. You have agency over that. And so to not feel powerless or, doomed to a certain trajectory, that's just not the case. And so I think, yeah, I just want to encourage everyone that the things we talked about today are things you can do literally today, right after this. You can do them during your day. It doesn't require really for you to change your routine at all. It's just changing the way you're doing it or the way you're approaching it or how you're thinking and engaging day to day. So yeah, hope
It's
that.
great. Julie, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to make sure we shout out your newsletter, your Substack called Better Brain. It sounds like you've got some workshops that are coming
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, workshop next week about focus, fighting distraction, detachment from your phone. And I'll be sending out more information about that tomorrow. So hop on my list and you'll
That's
get the
great.
info.
That's great. And I'm going to link in the show notes the Lancet Commission for Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care, which they came out with new information in 2024 about the 14 modifiable risk factors for cognitive decline, which include the things that we already know about: exercise, cigarette smoking cessation, limiting alcohol, eating your blueberries and your salmon and your other antioxidants, um, managing stress, social connection, those kinds of things. We've touched on all of those, but what's been nice today is talking about the practical application of like flexing your brain as a muscle and practical ways to incorporate that into your everyday life. And I just appreciate you so much, Julie. Thanks for doing what you do, and for your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Okay, bye bye. Take care, everybody.